Good evening to you both, and let's begin with UCP MLA Peter Guthrie voting with the opposition Monday on an NDP motion calling for a public inquiry into allegations of interference and corruption involving AHS contracts. The opposition has accused the government of issuing a gag order to staff to stifle investigations by the Auditor General. In a leaked memo, a senior deputy minister told employees to redirect requests from the AG to the province's legal team, and while the health minister said the AG signed off on that, the Auditor General's office told CTV News that was a surprise. Here's what Peter Guthrie had to say in the legislature Monday.
To properly represent my constituents, I cannot be held in perpetuity to a suspension from caucus, which comes with a gag order. I am now at day 48 of my so-called 30-day suspension, impeding my democratic right to fully represent the people of Airdrie-Cochrane.
Guthrie resigned as infrastructure minister in February, citing lack of support for his concerns over the AHS procurement allegations. A spokesperson for the party says Guthrie remains a member of the UCP caucus. Okay, Jim, what is to be made of the position taken by Peter Guthrie, the willingness to continue speaking out against the government he was elected to represent?
Well, this is quite phenomenal when you get right down to it, because as a former minister, he's had the inside baseball view of everything, and he knows where the bodies are buried, and he seems like he's a little nervous that there's going to be some revelations here in the investigations that aren't going to be very kind to the UCP. I think that's saying it somewhat mildly. Now, the fact that he did vote for the motion from the NDP is startling. However, of course, it wasn't a government motion. It wasn't a confidence motion. So it has a lot less impact than if it was, well, as an example, when Sinclair was kicked out of the caucus for voting against the budget. It was a confidence vote, and it was much more symbolic than what we have for Guthrie. But he's definitely not happy. He's expressing his concerns, and rightly so. He does represent his riding. And a lot of people forget that when we get into parliamentary unity and voting as a bloc. A lot of people forget that it's their members, their voters that they're actually supposed to be representing.
Graham, voting with the opposition, comments he continues to make in the legislature and to the media. What kind of standing do you feel this leaves Peter Guthrie in where the UCP caucus is concerned?
Well, it's more of an awkward for him. It's really awkward for the government. Like, again, yeah, this is a huge I guess the next step in this whole brewing scandal over the AHS and the allegations of corruption, basically, within the system of the government, putting pressure on AHS to hire a particular company to have contracts worth millions of dollars. So, yeah, so the question right now is, will the government move against Guthrie, or sorry, the caucus? It's all about the caucus right now. And as we speak right now, the government saying, or sorry, the caucus saying, it's business as usual. This was a free vote on that motion, and Guthrie just chose to vote with the NDP. Now, Guthrie's being careful. You know, he is not standing up in the House and slamming the government. He did introduce a couple of columns in Post Media yesterday that were slamming the government. So that's kind of a tacit way of saying, he is saying he agrees with these columns that slam the government. So the next step is going to be, what will caucus do with him? Because he is becoming a loose cannon for the government, and that's a major problem. They put a gag order on him saying, behave yourself. You're still in caucus, but behave yourself. And he is thinking, look, it's been 48 days. And you said 30 days sort of banishment. He's still in caucus, but he's in a sort of limbo. But the thing is, this is a problem for the government. It wasn't just him voting with the NDP. Scott Sinclair, who's kicked out of caucus for his comments regarding the budget, he also voted with the NDP yesterday. So you got a bit of a brewing mutiny on the hands of Danielle Smith and her government.
Jim, the government obviously voted down the NDP motion demanding a public inquiry. But does there come a point, Jim, where the government has no choice but to eventually trigger an inquiry?
Well, there's really no obligation for them to do that unless they can they get a motion. And even if a motion did pass in the House, it's not obligatory. They don't have to follow that. And I think we we see the technique by the government is they'd rather come up with lawsuits and threaten lawsuits than actually come up with a solution. The public, as they get more engaged, they see the big factors here that we have companies making millions and millions of dollars for what appears to be inefficient and ineffectual medicines and treatments, etc., overcost involved for surgeries, etc., and that hits the public in a big way. But we don't have an election for another 2 years, but there is also a UCP annual convention within a year. So the minister and the premier are stuck between a rock and a hard place, trying to decide who are they going to serve, the party interests or the interests of the people of Alberta. And at this point, they're going with the interest of the party because Danielle Smith has seen what happened to Jason Kenney, and she doesn't want to be that victimized by the same group of Take Back Alberta controllers of the party.
And Graham, real quick, what are you looking to come of the controversy surrounding the government hiring lawyers to funnel requests from the Auditor General, instructing staff to contact said lawyers when approached by the AG?
Yeah, it's interesting because, this letter was brought up by the NDP, and you have the government saying, "Oh, it's okay. The Auditor General knew all about this. This is just normal practices." And the Auditor General say, "No, this is not right. I do not like this." It's one thing after another. The government's doing all it can to keep a lid on this brewing scandal, having investigations that were only going to go halfway, not a full public inquiry, of course. But then you have this thing every day, it seems, something else trips up the government and puts pressure on the government and makes the government look bad. And this is just one more example. We see the government trying to, I would say, hamper any sort of investigation into this so-called corrupt care, as the NDP has gleefully dubbed it. I think the government's got a real problem on its hand and is having a really hard time handling it.
All right. Still on the provincial front, we heard from the National Police Federation off the top tonight, pushing back on comments from the Public Safety Minister, defending the Smith government's continued push toward creation of a provincial police service. Graham, how much of a tussle do you see building here between the NPF and the Smith government, and to what degree does it change dialogue around this whole issue of direction of policing?
Yeah, it's a real tussle. The thing is, this government is set in one direction. This is an issue, don't forget, that the government would not discuss, or Premier wouldn't discuss during the election 2 years ago. She talked about an Alberta police force during her leadership campaign in 2022, became Premier, and then went very quiet on controversial topics like the Alberta pension plan and the Alberta police force during the election, and then wins the election, and then, of course, we've still got the government moving ahead on the police force now, doing its own sort of dance to try and make this a reality, even though it seems most Albertans don't want this, aren't talking about it. Even rural areas, some want it. And a lot of people just don't want it and saying there's more important issues right now. But this government is dead set to get a provincial police force. And this goes back to what we saw last September, October, November, with the Premier talking to her members ahead of their leadership review, saying, "Hey, listen, I'm with you. I'm going to bring a lot of these things in place that you really want, that, of course, weren't part of the election campaign. This is just one more of them where she's dead set to do this to help silence or keep her base happy."
Jim, obviously, National Police Federation not on board, but what degree of buy-in do you feel the government needs from Albertans before creating this policing agency? Is this the sort of substantial move that requires a referendum, a vote?
Well, I think they do need something to substantiate their support, because rural municipalities of Alberta voted 80% against having the RCMP changed. And they are the group that uses the facilities of the RCMP the most. The 2021 report that Kenney initiated came out, it's going to cost us at least $400 million for the conversion and another $60 million a year more for services by the sheriffs rather than the RCMP. The fact that the sheriffs have come out and said, well, we haven't been consulted, we aren't properly trained, they get 15 weeks of training, whereas police services get 24. There's a whole raft of problems with this that seem to keep surfacing. And this is just another example of some of the unpopular policies that the government keeps pushing, hand-counted ballots, the pension plan, it just seems to go on and on and on, that people have said very clearly, we don't want these things, and the government just keeps pushing.
Controversy on the federal campaign trail to start the week, and it resulted in the Liberal leader condemning members of his own party's war room.
This is totally unacceptable, to be absolutely clear. And I, on behalf of my campaign, I was unaware of this behavior, but on behalf of my campaign, I apologize for it unreservedly.
This after a journalist overheard Liberal staffers saying they planted fake buttons at a Conservative conference in Ottawa last week. Okay, so Jim, some have taken to calling this button gate. How big a deal is it, and what kind of blowback impact could it have on the Liberal campaign?
I think by the next media cycle, it'll be history, to tell you the truth. It's some junior, overly enthusiastic candidate followers in the campaign itself that have gotten off the deep end. Now, if it turns out that there's more depth in that and there's higher levels of support for this or something, well, that would be different. But Carney had to take the step that he was against this. He had to take the high road, condemn it with unequivocally, and I think pretty much that's the issue, and they'll move on.
Graham, what kind of light does this shed on the Liberal election campaign, the team running it?
Yeah, this does not look good at all. They should have been fired, not reassigned. And this is a problem for Carney. When that Peter Chang, sort of controversial candidate in Ontario, made problems for the team. At first, you had Carney saying no, he doesn't stand by the comments, but then he didn't boot him out. Eventually, he had to boot him out. The thing is, if these are sort of a couple of people who got again over the top and got overly enthusiastic and planted these buttons, fire them. And also, Carney did not. He just said he wasn't aware. He didn't say nobody in the senior, management of the campaign were aware of this. These people acted on their own. His wording to me didn't go far enough. And yes, this may get buried in 2 more weeks till the election, less than 2 weeks to the election. But these kind of things can cause problems for campaigns. And right now, even the Liberals are ahead in terms of the vote in the polling. Campaigns matter. And these things can cause problems. Now, we'll see if it actually does get buried. It may very well not be a major issue, but Carney should have fired them and put this issue to rest once and for all.
Okay, so Jim, how much of a gift does this give Pierre Poilievre heading into this week's 2 official debates?
Well, I can't see him really milking this during the debates for any length of time. It doesn't have that resonance to the taxpayers, to the electorate. There's no direct connection where, somebody's RSPs are starting to fall because of the tariffs that Trump is imposing. That hits home, whereas these buttons, dirty tricks, I don't think they have the same resonance in this nature. It's not like the robocalls that we had a few years back, where it was really an attempt to circumvent someone's voting rights. This was stupid, and I think, basically speaking, the people who did it must be, questioning their own judgment at this time. Graham's probably right that they could have been fired instead of reassigned, would have made a stronger statement. But we're also, if he does that, then he becomes the cruel, heartless leader, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's really difficult to take a solid position. But I think once the 2 debates get going on, this will be forgotten.
Well, and Graham, above and beyond this particular campaign controversy dogging the Liberals, what will you be watching for from this week's official French and English language leaders debates getting underway on Wednesday?
Well, we'll see. Just the back and forth. Carney's very, very smart, of course, and Poilievre is smart. But Carney has a lot of experience in the world, and we'll see actually how they relate to each other face to face, and just how nasty it's going to get. The thing is, we're always looking for the so-called knockout blow in campaign debates, and most times they're pretty much the status quo. Nothing really changes. But now and again, you think back to Alberta and Jim Prentice versus Rachel Notley. There's a knockout blow where it was a real problem for Prentice, and it really made Rachel Notley, solidified her as a front runner, and she won that election in 2015. So I'm looking for the interpersonal play between these two leaders who are, I think, as Poilievre is a very good debater, and we'll see if Carney's experience in the world can outmatch what Poilievre can do in terms of attacks.
Last 20 seconds to you, Jim. What are you watching for?
Yeah, I think Poilievre has to tone down his rhetoric a little bit, make him look a little bit more prime ministerial. And Carney, on the other hand, has to ramp it up a little bit to see that he is a fighter and is going to be able to take on Donald Trump.
All right. Okay. We'll have to leave it there, gentlemen. Good to see you both. Thank you kindly.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Graham.